Welcome to the TDS Early Years podcast. Now, each week we're going to be joined by different educational experts from across the globe who are going to offer exclusive insights, inspiration and guidance to help us as practitioners unlock all the potential for learning that there is in the early years. So to be first to hear about future episodes and to access all of the follow-up content, including ideas for your own setting, Pinterest, mood boards and loads more, you can sign up for exclusive access using the link in our podcast description. Hello and welcome to TDS Talking Early Years with me, Alistair Bryce-Clegg, and my guest today, Cheryl Hadland. And now in this episode, we're going to be exploring the idea of planting and eating in the early years and trying to share with you some practical ideas to make it more sustainable. Because I know, Cheryl, from my experience, everybody gets really excited about planting and we often buy or have made these massive planters, and usually year one is quite successful or not, depending on what you plant. And then by the time you get to either the autumn or the winter and everything's looking a bit tired and the weeds set in, and then it's hard to find the time. So sometimes it can be a really lovely idea to do with children, quite a difficult thing to maintain.
I think it is a challenge. You know, I grew up in a flat and my parents didn't grow anything in my flat. So I didn't grow up with this rich growing culture that some of my colleagues have. I mean, I've been delighted, you know, when you actually get to know some of your team, some of them will have had parents or grandparents that have been keen on gardening. I mean, just today I was speaking to a nursery manager whose father worked in one of these great homes where they did a lot of planting in walled gardens and so on, and he'd inspired her, and she was able to then inspire her team. But it's kind of drawing on that expertise because, you know, people say, I've got green fingers or I haven't got green fingers. It's not about the colour of your fingers, is it? It's about knowledge.
Yeah.
And that's not included in most early years practitioners training, is it? It's not a standard thing as to how do you grow stuff. It's a skill. It's something we really need to learn. But you can start in really simple ways, like growing cress in the classroom. Just about anybody can work that one out. And if you can't, then again, go to YouTube. Because there you can get the help as to what you can grow it in and on and so on. You know, you can make it grow out of a thing to make the hair on a face and all kinds of things to make it fun and make it fast. Yes. You know, because children like to see something reacting quite fast. And to be honest, so do some of our teams. So it takes a little while. So you need to pick on the stuff that you either can grow easily. I mean, I can see in your background, you've got spider plants, Alistair.
Yes.
I love spider plants because they're almost indestructible, aren't they?
And they have babies.
Got some behind me as well.
And so the children love it. My nieces and nephews love it. And then we clip off a little baby and stick it into the mortar and then take it home and then they grow their own. So, I mean, and they are dead simple. And there's so much to talk about. I think also you've got your kind of indoor grown and eaten and your outdoor grown and eaten. Yeah. I mean, I remember as a child, a long time ago, taking a boiled egg with growing a face on, growing cress in there. Then as a practitioner, we did it by filling tights with cotton wool. I think you can do it with sawdust as well.
Right. I don't know that one.
Put a pair of tights stuffed with cotton wool.
Yeah.
I mean, you can grow cress on anything. I think when you move it outside, that's where it can get a little bit more challenging because you're right, things take a while to grow and that can be frustrating. But also, I remember as a reception teacher trying to grow carrots, thinking I was going to have these amazing prize-winning carrots. And I think most of them died. And then I got two tiny little stubby things that had huge greenery out the top. So when we pulled them out of the soil with great
tiny little carrot that's about a minute high.
So I wouldn't start with carrots, radishes maybe. But again, it's that knowledge, isn't it, around like, where do you start? What do I plant? Yeah. Another setting I was working with a while ago had worked over a period of time again with somebody with green fingers, and a parent had really helped them with it. But they had a yearly schedule for planting, which meant there was always something either growing or ready for harvesting. Now, it obviously took a bit of effort and took a bit of thinking, but once they had that schedule going, it meant they were never had that kind of empty bed or nothing there.
That's right.
That really well.
Yeah, I mean, the Royal Horticultural Society and various others produce a timetable for growing in this country. But just be aware that there's a big difference between Northumberland and Cornwall. So the timing is going to be a little bit different. And our experience is you really have to teach children the respect of the plant early on, or the staff make such a big effort to grow stuff, and then the children are pulling it out too early because they're curious. So it's not something you perhaps want to do with a brand new group of children coming in September. It's something that you're going to need to do the following spring once you've gone through the basics of teaching them respect for planting, which you can do indoors.
And I think it's a really good point that children are biologically curious. And as early as practitioners, we shouldn't be frustrated if somebody pulls our radishes up, because actually what we're seeing is children demonstrating really typical behaviour for learning. But it's also really hard if you've planted those radishes out, beautifully and carefully.
Yeah,
but you did like those
high up as well. Instead of planting it all within children's height, plant some that they can't actually dig out terribly easily. Bring it down when you're ready. But also plant stuff that they really can see, like strawberries are wonderful things to grow because they can poke out of the holes of the container that you're growing in them. And then the children can actually pick them and wash them and eat them.
Which is great. And talking about, as we were in our last episode about recycling, there are so many things. Again, Google is your friend here. But growing things in plastic bottles, in tubs, in buckets, where things that children can collect waste, in inverted commas, and turn it into a garden. And again, doesn't always look the prettiest when you first start, but actually as the plants grow and can make a massive impact on a space using purely recycled materials.
I think carrots are actually quite fun because you can grow them in plastic bottles, but you turn them away when you're not looking at the carrot, and you can talk to the child about dark and light and how roots, they're growing underground because they like the dark, whereas the green bit likes the light. So we're going to turn it away and then turn it towards them to have a look. And then you can actually see how little your carrot is before the children pull them out.
That's terrible. It was, and I probably did it as a big ta-da, because they looked huge. Come on, let's plant carrots. And also you can, when you get a little better, another setting I work with had seasonal planting around their favourite books. So they did things around, there's a big debate in our house about what's a turnip and what's a swede, because I was brought up in the northeast of England where turnips are the yellow orange things and swedes are the little white things.
Okay.
My wife, who was brought up further south,
orange. Yeah,
says the other. Never mind. But they grew things like very small pumpkins that were easy to grow. They grew turnips. They grew various things, onions, so they could make soup. Beetroot they grew. So things that fitted in quite nicely with things they were talking about at the time, and that worked well. But again, it was just part of a plan.
Do you know that works well with children with English as a second language as well? Because you're teaching the children the names of these fruits and vegetables, using the books or posters alongside what you're planting. But you could also find out what the word for onion is, oignon in French, for example. In some languages it's very similar, but in other languages it's very different. So you've got a lovely opportunity there to show respect for children that have English as a second language. So what is that in their language?
Yes. And that's a nice little bit of cultural crossover, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think also a lot of settings I work with have issues around if they have whatever they call a mud kitchen or a texture kitchen, and then children just strip the greenery it's within arm's reach because they want to put it in their potions and textures and things. So again,
do you know what you do there? Is go along to your local florist and ask for all the flowers that are past their sell-by date. And you'll get a load of flowers with very colourful petals and so on, whether you're growing anything in your garden or not. And you can bring bunches of flowers back, and then the children can use those for making their potions.
Which is a brilliant tip. And also asking parents, if any do, that have got flowers or things in their garden, even if they've gone over, that they can bring it as long. Obviously, if things come from people's gardens, you have to check that they're safe and there's no berries and things like that.
Yes.
But also you can plant for the texture kitchen herbs, things like mint, which grow furiously once they're planted.
Yeah.
In whatever sink you planted in or bucket or whatever it may be. Once that I went to had a toilet that
why not?
Taken out and planted up. It looked amazing. There was stuff coming out of the cistern and stuff coming out of the bowl. Not everybody's cup of tea, but they loved it and the children loved it. So things like herbs, and you can get obviously the chocolate smelling herbs, the curry smelling herbs. Yeah. And they're relatively simple to grow.
They are wonderful for perfume type play.
and for eating, and for mixing in your Play-Doh,
And
and for
free.
sensory work, and all for free. So
You
I
can
think,
also hole punch the leaves, and that gives you a glitter equivalent where they can actually use it for decorating their cards. And it's good for
yeah,
hand-eye coordination because they're using a hole punch.
I saw somebody do that in the autumn and had loads of brilliant colours, but also with some those thicker waxy green leaves in the
Yeah.
summer. And
Yeah.
they'd all punched those. And then one child was weaving little bits of string through the
Oh,
holes.
marvellous.
So
Yes.
just of their own volition, just enjoying themselves doing that. So again, it's checking that things aren't poisonous, because
Yeah.
again, some leaves can be if they are consumed. So again, there are people who will do that for you. Most local authorities have somebody that they will send out and do a check. You can buy people in to do that. And I think
Oh, I think you can use an app on your phone, though, can't you,
you
to
can,
identify the plant, and
yeah,
then you can just look the plant up and see whether it is toxic or not. Problem is, you can't do that again with the children because you've
yeah.
got your phone in the classroom. You can't do that, so it's got to be taken to the manager's office or done at home or on the way in.
And I think
But once,
part of your setup, if you're going to set up an indoor environment, you would think
yeah,
about all of those health and safety things, and you think,
yeah,
right, if I'm going to let my children go out, let's check all of the spaces that we've got. And again, had a debate with a setting that had a tree that produced wonderful berries, but they hung over into their setting and dropped loads of berries on the floor. And all the children wanted to do was to collect the berries. And obviously, the more people said don't eat berries, the more they were tempted to put berries in their mouth. So again, it's that discussion that
someone
you
was very
have around, is it a safe environment? What can we do to make it safer and manage the risk?
yeah, and provide something else that's more attractive if you can.
Yeah.
And actually, those things could be attractive to the wildlife as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are so many things we can do in terms of then you're planting, and then when your planting's over, even things like sunflowers, which you plant early. And the thing about a sunflower is, unless you're in a nursery where you've got children who are continually attending, if you're in a nursery in a school or a school environment, then they tend to flower when nobody's there. But then even if they do, when you come back and all those wonderful seed heads that you can let dry out and use the seeds and all that kind of thing. So it's looking into what's available. But I know you're right. There are lots of places that do, like the RHS do, a planting guide.
They do.
But yeah, you have to bear in mind that when I lived in the windy northeast of England, I wouldn't have grown half of what I could grow in wet Manchester, where I now live. But you're right, if I lived in Devon, it'd be a whole
new ball game. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do find the local parents and grandparents are a fantastic source, not just of information, but actually bringing in bits that, where they've put some in a greenhouse and they've grown too many, and then they bring some in to the nursery, and we can then plant them on at nursery. But it's just developing that relationship with parents, if you're lucky enough to have those parents in your community.
And the whole idea of taking cuttings, either from your own space or from spaces where you're allowed to take cuttings, so like a walk to the park or a walk in the environment, don't just go hacking off people's gardens because they might get cross. But the idea of rooting things, and we did it in our garden where we took the stem of a rose and stuck it in a potato, and it rooted. And the following year I was quite amazed and gobsmacked by putting a rose in a potato. I didn't think it was going to work. I mean, that took time. So you've got to bear that into mind. But where you can get plants that will produce roots in water, that can happen fairly quickly, and there's loads to look at.
Well, the old spider plant does that. You can see that one producing its roots in water. So, and that's, cheap as chips or free to get spider plants because we just recirculate them amongst each other.
Absolutely. So it's looking for filling your indoor setting with plants that don't mind not being watered very often, can cope with the temperature being red hot or freezing cold. So there are plants out there that do survive quite well, spider plant being one of them, and try not to spend lots of money filling your setting with all the gorgeous plants you see in IKEA that are lovely and green and bushy, but like in 6 weeks' time will be brown and crispy and just in the corner somewhere.
We've had to introduce the close down checks, include checking the plants.
Yeah.
And particularly if you decide to close a room down and combine rooms, because you've got a COVID closure or something like that, it's quite easy to forget all the plants that are alive in that room, and you have to bring them back into one of the other rooms because out of sight is out of mind, isn't it? So
yeah, and they are easily missed. I think you can also, from garden centres, you can buy things like aubergine plants, and you wouldn't necessarily put chili peppers into a setting for obvious reasons.
Sweet peppers are great.
Yeah. And they will actually fruit and grow. And
Yeah.
sometimes I remember doing it with an aubergine plant, and we got very small aubergines, but the children were fascinated. But also indoor vines that will, I mean, I've worked in several settings that have started with a very small vine or climbing plant, which has been quite a rapid grower, but all of a sudden, and for small children, when you've got that vertical height that they can look at, and of course it opens up to a whole range of stories and imagination and things like that.
Yes, I mean, Jack and the Beanstalk type stories just obviously spring to mind. I mean, growing beans is actually very easy, and they're very colourful with their pretty bright red flowers. And then, of course, you can, when they're grown, cut them, bring them inside and eat them for tea, which, you know, is exactly what we want, because we need to give children the message that we don't just buy green beans in a supermarket covered in plastic. We can grow them in our gardens and bring them in and eat them fresh. And that's just so exciting.
And the whole peas, I mean, again, that whole popping of the pod.
Yeah.
Inside. So, yeah, I mean, we have at home successfully grown peas. I've grown beans in a setting. But again, it's a little bit of knowledge, and it's only a little bit. And the internet will give you loads of that.
Yeah.
And the fact you get flowers, the fact they grow, the fact that you can measure and even just use the language of your mathematics around them.
Count how many you've got. Tomatoes are another one. Really easy to grow tomatoes, grow bags and so on. They're just, you know, just tremendously easy. I'll tell you what you do need, though, for planting is to make some compost. And, of course, making compost and using a wormery in a nursery is a wonderful activity, because you've got your sorting and you're separating and what worm eats what, and you can't use earthworms. You have to use tiger worms or red worms, because it's the worms that you find on the surface that are the ones that make a compost for you and eat those green plants and bits and pieces that the children don't eat for lunch, the raw, you know, bits and pieces. Whereas the earthworms are underneath the earth and burrowing, so you can't dig a worm out and then expect it to work in a wormery. But you can look underneath the pots. If you've got pots in the, you know, the front or the back of the nursery, look underneath the pots, and if there are any worms, those little greyish worms, those are the ones that you want for wormeries. And of course, then you can have them for free, as long as you don't have a parent that's a fisherman, because they'll want them for bait. Obviously, we don't want that.
And again, I've seen wormeries made really simply with plastic buckets with holes drilled in the bottom.
Yeah.
And you can buy the things that you need if you want to use the real proper stuff online relatively cheaply. And what I didn't know was that they produce this kind of worm juice or worm, which drains out of the bottom. Then you fertilize your plants with that, and it's amazing.
That's stuff.
On that note, Cheryl, that brings us to the end of this episode. So thank you all for listening. And thank you again, Cheryl, for your insight and ideas. And again, any of the things that we've talked about or any of the references we made, you will find in the podcast notes below. But don't forget to tune into our next episode, where we've got loads more hints and tips about sustainability in the early years outdoors. So all it leaves for me to do is to say a huge thank you to our guest, Cheryl, for joining us and providing such valuable insights and ideas all around sustainability in the early years. So you've been listening to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast with me, Alistair Bryce-Clegg, and with Cheryl Hadland. If you've been inspired by our conversation today, then don't forget you can sign up via the link in our episode notes, and then you'll be the first to hear about future episodes. But also, doing that, you can access some exclusive follow-up content, and that includes things like ideas for your setting, Pinterest boards that will help you to shop for resources that are all linked to sustainability and sustainable practices within the early years.